So, thank you for joining us. We are Teach the Shoah, and tonight's program is all history and stories about Auschwitz, as we are now commemorating the 80th anniversary of liberation. Our sharing program this January is dedicated to Auschwitz. This evening, we will hear stories and history. And at the end, we will break for Q&A. The first story of the evening is Jan Karski. I was born in Lodz in 1914 to a Catholic family. My parents educated all of us to be patriotic, to be Polish. I went to law school, but what I was really interested was diplomacy. And during my studies, I got to do internship both in the diplomatic corps and the consular corps in different countries. I was in Germany, I was in Romania, I was in Switzerland. In 1938, winds of war started to blow all over the place. And I joined the army, the Polish army, Armia Krajowa. I was in the horse battalion. We had our own camp in the countryside in Poland, in this tiny little village, Auschwitz. We all lived in barracks and we did drills and we did everything that we had to do. And at 5:05 in the morning of the 1st of September, the Germans started bombing us. Not just us, not just in Auschwitz, but all over Poland. And the invasion began. It took them 2 days to get to Auschwitz. All of us, every single person in the army barracks were taken. We were marched and marched all the way to the Russian border. And we just sat there waiting. We waited because they could negotiate. They could sell us, so to speak. Now, at that point, I was a bit higher ranking than the others, and I spoke a few languages, and I managed to speak with some of the Germans that were there, these Nazis. And I realized that nothing good will come from this. So I decided that I was going to leave. But you see, everybody could tell who I was, my uniform and my boots. I had the boots of an officer. So one night I escaped and I ended up knocking on a farmer's house. I need your boots and I need a jacket. I demanded, I didn't ask. War was on. Polish patriots wanted to help other Polish people. So I got into the farmer's coat and boots and I went off. A few months later, I already found myself in my first mission in the underground. But that's a story for another day. So we always start programs with a story, and that was our first story. And now we are going to delve into history. Auschwitz. Auschwitz has become a form of a symbol, almost holy in a way, When we say the Holocaust, we think of this sign, Arbeit macht frei. We think about gas chambers, we think about selection. We know things, we have visuals in our minds. And why is that? It is possible that one of the main reasons is that it was so big. And it's also possible that upon liberation, there were survivors, quite a few of them. But to understand Auschwitz, we need to go back to the beginning. So Jan Karski stayed in barracks in Auschwitz that became eventually Auschwitz I. And Auschwitz grew and grew. The instruction to establish a concentration camp came in the spring of 1940, and it came from both the SS and the local police in occupied territories of Poland. Poland no longer existed at this point. What we had is the Generalgouvernement, for short, GG. The reasoning for this was prisons were overflowing. They were overflowing with Polish resistance members, with Polish intelligentsia. This had nothing to do with Jews or anything that Auschwitz then becomes a symbol for. So the thought of having a concentration camp like the Nazis had in Germany, like Dachau, or the ones that came right after Dachau. Dachau was established in 1933. So the concept of concentration camps already existed. This abandoned army base in Auschwitz seemed ideal. It is ready to use. There are 20 buildings, more than enough infrastructure to house prisoners. The request to open this as a concentration camp went through the chain of command because the Nazis do like some form of order. And the request lands on the Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler, very, very high ranking, who decides that, okay, this sounds like a logical thing to do. And yes, now to have a concentration camp, we also need to have somebody to run the camp. The person that was picked was SS Führer Rudolf Höss. Now, he's had experience in concentration camps before. He's already been in quite a few, commanding them. And he seems to be very methodically open to whatever expansions or decreases that the Reich requires. So on May 4th, 1940, Höss becomes the official commandant of Auschwitz. The first thing that he does is that he comes to this place, looks around, and realizes that outside these military barracks, there are small hamlets, small villages. There's roughly 1,200 Polish civilian people living there. So the first thing to do is to resettle them. The excuse is that at some point they might want to expand. There is no problem in moving population at this point. It's been done since the beginning of the war, since 1939. So those people are expelled and their houses demolished. The next thing is to want to expand a bit this camp, you need to have working people. But also this is going to be a form of a prison. So therefore the people that will be entering this camp will be prisoners. So the first transport arrives in Auschwitz, now already called Auschwitz, on the 14th of June. 728 Polish prisoners from Tarnow are sent to Auschwitz. Excuse me. These prisoners are mainly non-Jewish. There are a few Jews in them, but not that many. At the same time, you also need people to look after these prisoners or command these prisoners. So 100 SS men are sent to reinforce the very small team that arrived with Hus the month before. And within a few weeks of everybody settling in and putting down new pipes for water and refurbishing some of these barracks, Himmler decides that he's going to come and see this new concentration camp. It's the first one that is now established in the GG. He wants to see what's going on there. And he has a little look around. And Himmler has thoughts, but he's not the only one that has thoughts, because other people within the Nazi hierarchy decide that they want different things to happen in this new area, which now has nothing apart from the barracks because the small hamlets have been completely demolished. Now, Auschwitz is next to a train station and next to two little rivers, and the land seems quite fertile. So one of the thoughts is this land should be used for agricultural development. Another thought is there is this company, IG Farben, that needs to expand now and build a plant to create rubber tires, to create all sorts of other chemically based things. They need a plant, they need workers. And we also need a bigger concentration camp because these barracks here in Auschwitz can house about 10,000 people, more or less, if you hand them all together. All three plans happen. And I just want to prefix for a minute. I usually, in any talk that I give, try not to use any kind of Nazi photography, but in the case of Auschwitz, I'm afraid we don't have much choice. So in advance, I apologize for using these photos. Most of these photos were not taken for propaganda, more for documentation. Auschwitz II-Birkenau was established, and so was Auschwitz III, Bona Mosevich, and then all other 40 subcamps. What we see here is the building of the entrance to Auschwitz II-Birkenau. This photo is from 1943, not right when the camp was opened. There was a smaller gate. Unfortunately, I could not find a visual for us for that. Excuse me. What we see in front of us is a general map of the three main Auschwitz camps. So we have Auschwitz I, which was referred to by the Nazis as main camp. Auschwitz II, Birkenau, the one with the 4 gas chambers and crematoriums. And we have Auschwitz III, which is the IG Farben, known as Bona Mosevich. Excuse me. But in reality, we have more than just those 3 camps. We have 40 subcamps. These are spread all over this area in Upper Silesia that we see in the map. Within Auschwitz II, however, we will find that there were also subcamps within the camp itself. Before we continue with our talk, I would like to introduce Theodore Kagan, who will be telling us the story of Norbert Volhim, an Auschwitz survivor. Ted, whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Lynn. My name is Norbert Wilhelm, originally from Berlin. My parents were deported in December of 1941 as part of the first wave of transportation to Auschwitz. My wife and I and our 3-year-old son knew that it would be only days before we would be shipped out. We tried to prepare for that, but how does one really prepare for such an event? My wife and the son immediately was shot immediately upon arrival, and I was assigned as a slave labor in a factory that manufactured artificial rubber, which was in short supply. We knew that if we can do the work, we had a chance to survive. We worked very hard and no opportunity to clean ourselves after work. We also had to walk from our barracks to the factory about 1 mile each way. Some of the workers yelled and screamed that they had enough and they started to run from the group. And the SS guards that accompanied us to the factory would immediately shoot and kill them. I understand that they were glad to shoot since they were compensated for doing that. Another thing that worked against us was the weather. The mornings were so freezing and so cold, and we did not have proper clothing. In the end of the day, we had to carry the dead bodies who perished that day out of the factory and then back to the barracks. If I recall, we lost approximately 240 men from the factory. Somehow, somehow Hashem had kept me alive for some unknown purpose.
Thank you so much, Ted. Appreciations for Ted's story, please leave them in the chat. So, as we could hear in Ted's story, we had many different people doing many different things in Auschwitz. And I'd like to talk a bit about Auschwitz itself and how it was, Auschwitz to Birkenau, and how it was constructed. As you can see, we have an aerial map here that was taken in 1944 by the US Air Force. And it kind of shows exactly what we can see in this blueprint that was provided by the USHMM. It was made up of many subcamps within that main camp, all divided by gates and barbed wire. We have Mexico, which was basically the last extension to the camp. It had more barracks with room to build even more if the war would have continued. We have the main section of the camp, which was made up of women's barracks and men's barracks. And then we had the B camps for gypsies, Sinti and Roma, the family camp for families that came from Terezin as part of the sample camping, so to speak. All of them were pretty much the same. Barracks were made up of wooden huts that kind of resemble sheds, only very, very long. In every shed or in every barrack, we had bunks, shelves, basically. Not real beds, but shelves. 3 stories high, and each one, 2 to 5 people would sleep, usually head to toe. If one had to turn over, everybody has to turn over. These would go from the entrance of the barrack all the way to the exit of the barrack. And on the side of each one, there was another internal room, which was the rooms of the capos. A barrack could house about 1,000 people, depending on the time. All the barracks looked pretty much the same, but within each camp and each sub-camp, there are also commanders, SS officers, guards, watchtowers, barbed wire, and electric fences. In Auschwitz, the expansion was constant. I'm going to just pop back the slides for you. As we can see here, Auschwitz II already exists. The work on Auschwitz III begins. And in the bottom photo, we can see this is the construction of these wooden sheds, barracks, whatever we want to call them. What we have is slave labor, people who at the beginning were living in Auschwitz main camp, Auschwitz I, marched 2.5 kilometers to Auschwitz II every single day to build. When some of the barracks were ready for living, if living is something we can call this, they would already stay in those barracks. This is the view from one of the watchtowers in Birkenau. This one specifically was called the Death Gate. This was the one that led usually to the gas chambers. In Auschwitz I, in main camp, there was one gas chamber and one crematoria. And in Auschwitz II Birkenau, 4 additional chambers were built. In the subcamps, there were no gas chambers and no crematorias. If in any selection there was a need in the eyes of the Nazis to send people to be gassed to death, they would be sent back into Birkenau. This is gas chamber number 3 and crematoria. I had made a conscious choice not to show you a model of the gas chambers itself, but what we see above ground is not the only part of it. There is an underground section as well, which is where the undressing happens and the marching in to the gas chambers. So up until 1944, Auschwitz II has its own process. When deportations begin, they begin into the train station in Auschwitz, which is closer to Auschwitz I. Therefore, in some testimonies that we hear from survivors, we hear, we came out of the train and we saw on the side there was the sign Arbeit macht frei. That is not historically incorrect because they did arrive closer to that camp. They were then marched in groups all the way into Birkenau, into a smaller gate. The first transport of Jews into Auschwitz was a group of women, 999 women, who arrived on March 1942, 26th of March. 999 women, all of them from Slovakia, were brought into Auschwitz. They all went through the process of intake. At this point, there was no selection. This is also the first time that tattoos begin in Auschwitz. Auschwitz is the only camp that had tattooed numbers. In other camps, we do have numbering of the prisoners, but they are usually on the uniforms or on metal dog tags or bracelets. There were also another 999 women that arrive on the same day. These are women from Germany. These are German women, non-Jewish. Most of them were either resistance or a form of antisocial people, which is what the Nazis called anybody who disagreed with them. So both groups of women were the first tattoos in Auschwitz. Numbers 1 to 1,998 are those women. Within a month of that date, so they all arrived on the 26th of March, 42, within a month, Auschwitz-Birkenau already has 6,000 inmates, and the numbers just keep growing. At the same time as this happens, we need to be conscious of the fact that the final solution to the Jewish question, which is the Nazi euphemism to how we're going to get rid of all the Jews, that has already started. It starts in the East first with killing pits, what has become afterwards known as the Holocaust by bullets, but also in the 4 death camps, which begin in Chelmno in December of 1941. So we have Chelmno, Belzec, Treblinka, and Sobibor. The killing in Auschwitz begins a bit later, begins in 1942. And it's important to make that kind of split in the history, because Auschwitz did start off as a concentration camp and then as a forced labor camp. But of course, it becomes a hybrid camp with killing as well. By the time the Nazis invade Hungary, the war machine, the killing machine, is very well oiled, to the point where, in preparation to the invasion of Hungary, the train tracks that up until 1944 stop in Auschwitz station are now extended right into Auschwitz to Birkenau, which is why that gate is built with the arch so the train can go through it. This is to save time in the process. There's already an understanding that when the Hungarian deportations will begin, they will be fast, and the process has to match that. As part of the growth of Auschwitz, there are more and more Nazi personnel working there. And some of them were assigned to create a gift to the Führer, to Hitler, a documentation of how well Auschwitz-Birkenau works. And over the span of 8 transports, which is about 3 days, 4 to 5 different Nazi officers go out with cameras and document the transports as they come in, and most of the process. This was all put into an album, nicely decorated, and a few copies were made of this album. The album was to be sent to Berlin. We still don't know if it actually reached the Führer. Researchers arguing about that, but an album did survive. The story of how the album survived is a survivor story that sometimes is questioned, so I'm not going to tell you that. But the fact of the matter is the album survives, and it reaches Yad Vashem. The photos, the next few photos that you're going to be seeing in the slideshow are taken from the Auschwitz album. And just again, be mindful that these are 8 different transports that all arrived in Auschwitz from Hungary. And the reason we're doing this is just to talk about how people were taken in Auschwitz. So most of the deportations happened by trains with cattle carts. About 100, just under 100 people could fit into one box cart, and an average train had about 2,400 to 2,500 people per transport. So what we see here is basically the coming off into the ramp. This is already inside Birkenau. And the next thing that will happen is what we all know, the story of selection. The first stage in selection is separating men from women in 2 lines. And you can see there are officers standing in the middle. But what we also see in this photo, which is important and interesting, is that we have people standing on the one side and on the other, facing each other. Why is this important? Because in many stories and in many testimonies, we hear, oh, Mengele or a Mengele-like person came and pointed left and pointed right. But what was life and what was to the gas chambers really depended on what side of the train you were. For some, left was gas chambers, for some it was right. So both answers are right when people tell you their Holocaust testimony. The ones who were sent straight for death were usually the ones who did not seem, to the person who looked at them for exactly 30 seconds, healthy enough or able enough to do work. At this point, I'm just going to stop the slides for a minute to give a bit more information. At this point, Auschwitz is this massive complex that has Birkenau, and it has the main camp, it has the IG Farben, it also has now ammunition factories, the Sims factories, it has agricultural land, it has many other industries in all these subcamps. And by 1944, when Germany is not doing that well in the war, they need more and more working hands. So yes, many people still end up in the gas chambers, but they are looking for anybody who could work. So if a 13-year-old boy arrives in Auschwitz, and in theory, they should be sent straight to the gas chambers. If they look as if they are able to work, and they lied and they said they're 16, oh, they get to go and work and live another day, maybe, if they're lucky. So depending on different times in Auschwitz, we have a different kind of ratio. At the beginning of the war, the ratio is 80% of the deportations into Auschwitz get to live for another few days, and 20% go to the gas chambers. In the height of the war, those statistics swap. 80% end up in the gas chambers, 20% are sent to life. By the summer of 44, we're flipping again. There's more need for work, so more people who seem able get to be saved. Let's go back to the Auschwitz album. So people who are selected to go to the gas chambers are marched off. At this point, by July and August of 1944, the 4 gas chambers are working day and night, 24 hours a day. The average is about 2,100 people per gas chamber every 2 to 3 hours. And yet people still ended up sitting and waiting outside the gas chambers, not really knowing at this point what is going to happen. German euphemisms is used constantly. When people are sent towards the gas chambers, they are told they are going to be disinfected, deloused, given new clothes, and they will be going off to work, not knowing that the same sentence is said to the people who really are going to be going to work. Most people sit around just waiting to see what will happen. As they're brought in to the entrance, usually there is somebody there greeting them saying, oh yes, here is your undressing room. There are hooks on the wall with numbers. Remember the number so that you can take your jacket on the other end. This lying and constant giving this false narrative that everything is going to be okay is used mainly to keep everything calm. They do not want anybody getting themselves worked up and maybe creating some kind of havoc at the entrance to the gas chambers. So, as I decided not to show you a module of the gas chambers, instead to represent the killing of 1,100,000 people by Cyclone B in the gas chambers of Auschwitz 1 and 2, I decided to bring you this pencil drawing by Yuda Bacon. This is how he memorialized his father, knowing that his father was gassed. Those who were chosen for work and life go through the intake process. They end up in a place called the sauna. That's a name the inmates gave the baths or the disinfecting area. Those were real showers, although even that was yet another way of dehumanizing and humiliating the people coming in there. They would play around with boiling water and freezing cold water in different kind of moments. People came in, had to strip completely. None of their belongings could stay with them. They were then shaven head to toe, every single part of their bodies, and then given uniforms. At different stages of the existence of the camp, we have different kind of uniforms for women. By 1944, there weren't enough of these striped pajamas, as some people call them, but the striped uniforms, and they end up with these brown dresses that many would say were very itchy and uncomfortable. Some were even left with their own clothing and with their own shoes, which was also very rare. So men and women go through the same kind of process, and they are tattooed. There were a few transports in 1944 where Auschwitz was a stop only, like a transit camp, and therefore the people who went through the camp, even though they went through the same kind of process of being shaved and having uniforms, they were not tattooed, as they were not going to be processed within the system. So this is another photo of just before the intake of women. Behind them is the sauna. Yes, it does have chimneys, but that's just because they did actually disinfect things, because the Germans were very big germaphobes. In the front row, we have the woman who found the Auschwitz album, Lily Jacobs. I cannot point her out to you because there is a debate whether she is one of these two women. Right after the war, she claimed she was one of them, and then a few years later, she claimed she was the other. Part of this has got to do with the fact that many survivors said that right after the shaving process, when they come out, they do not recognize each other at all. They just don't look the same. So the assumption is for Lily Jacobs, it was the same. So what happens to all the things that people had with them on their trains? They all end up in a place called Canada, which we saw earlier on the map. Canada was the sorting area in Auschwitz. Every single thing that arrives in Auschwitz with the transport is sent over to Canada to be inspected, to be sorted, and then to be bundled up and sent back to Germany. Clothing and jewelry and house utensils, everything was then sold, bringing in more money into the Reich. So what we can see here is somebody in a striped pajama picking up some of the bags that were left behind. And then you can see there's a truck here. The truck then starts driving towards the Canada area, and everything is taken out to be taken apart. In Canada, we had both men and women working. As you can see here, the women have hair, and they're wearing, again, different uniforms. Women who got to keep their hair usually were part of the, again, another euphemism, the welcoming committee, so that people come off the train and don't get scared by seeing bold women. So they got to keep their hair, and they got to wear, although it is a form of a uniform because they're all dressed pretty much the same, it still looks a bit more like work clothes and less prisoner-like. And before we continue, I would like to introduce Violet F. Helms, who's going to tell us the story of Rosa Roberta. Violet, Rosa, I'm going to spotlight you, and whenever you're ready, please begin.
Rosa was from Poland, and she had been very active in the underground when her family was taken to the ghetto. And then they were shipped off to Auschwitz. In Auschwitz, she was chosen to work, and work she did. She worked in Canada. When they brought the clothes in, it was up to the people in this area to go through them, to look for tears, to see what was in good condition and what was not. And she did this day in, day out. Man's shirt, a woman's dress, a child's school uniform, a nun's habit. Now, because she had been a part of an underground movement, her name was sort of known. Now, in Auschwitz, the underground movement itself worked in a way that was by word of mouth. This way, you couldn't know everyone. But one day in Canada, a man who was a part of the Sonderkommando group came to her quietly and said what he wanted her to do, if she would. It was a choice. You see, the Sonderkommando, who had been working so hard, when the transport slowed down and the Germans saw that they didn't need as many as they had, they took 300 of them, told them they were going off to work, and they killed them. Well, the ones that were left found out about it, and they knew that they would be next. So it was decided that they were going to blow up the crematorium. So on this day, when the gentleman spoke to Rosa, she had to make a choice. What he wanted her to do was to get a group together and start stealing gunpowder because they wanted to blow up the crematorium. He told her, and he left her. And she thought about it. A man's business shirt, a good pair of little boy's trousers, a tiny gown, a maternity dress, something had to be done, and so she made the choice to speak to 3 other women, Ollie, Esther, and Regina. And every day when they went to work at the munitions factory, they switched and went to work at the munitions factory. They would take a tiny amount between fingers. They would stick it under their arm or under a breast or between their legs. And they would go back with it until they would get about a teaspoon of powder. And then Rosa would put it in a cloth, fold it small, and pass it to the man who'd spoken to her. Now, the plan was to do this in June, but by October of that year, they knew something had to be done. So all this powder was taken, it was put around in the crematorium. The people inside had gathered what they called hold weapons, bars, tubes, whatever. And when they lit the fuse and it exploded. The Germans were in shock. And when the people came running out of the crematorium with their weapons in their hands, fighting the Germans, this was new. But the Germans had guns, they had dogs, and they killed 275, I believe, just right off. Now, in crematorium 1, there were 80 people that escaped from that. And with their machines, they cut the wire fence, because remember, they only put the electricity to it at night. So they cut the wire fence and they escaped. Of those 80 people, 27 survived till way after the war. Now, Rosa and these 3 other women, they hid among the other people that were around them. They went back to their barracks. They went to another barracks. They hid for just a few days, but the Germans were so angry, they hunted them down. They captured them there, and they tortured them from that day in June until October. They wanted names. They wanted things to do. They wanted to know who was fighting them, who gave them the powder, who did this, who did that. So one evening, the man that had asked Rosa to make the decision, he bribed a guard and went into the room where the torture was taking place. Now, at first, when he looked around, he didn't see anyone, but on the floor was a pile of what he took to be rags. And then they moved. It was Rosa. He quietly went to her, and in her state of, she looked at him and said, "Tell them, tell the others, we did not say a thing. We gave them nothing." All that time, all 4 of these very young women, because Rosa was 23 and the others were younger, they were beaten, they were tortured, and they gave nothing. Even after all of this, the Germans took the 4 women out and hung them. But they hung them out in front of the other prisoners, 2 in the morning and 2 at night. Rosa was the one of the 2 at night. And from those that were there, they say that these women yelled, "Vengeance." And Rosa sang Hatikva. And we remember them.
Thank you, Violet. And just so we have an image of this brave and courageous woman, this is Rosa. I'm going to step out a bit from our timeline, and I'm going to jump into 1952. In 1952, there's a bit of an archaeological dig in Auschwitz. And right outside crematorium that was blown up. There were a few glass bottles hidden in the ground. And in one of them, there's a preview letter. Dear Finder, please search every piece of this ground. We have laid the evidence down. We have kept evidence of what happened here. This will spread a light, a strong spotlight on what happened here. For us, there is no more hope. We don't really think we will ever see liberation. The future will judge us upon these notes. This is just a small evidence to the tragic world we live in. Zalman Gradowski, 6th of September, 1944. Before the Sonderkommando decide to go on their uprising, we need to step a month earlier. Something happens in Birkenau that makes the resistance realize that they need to take action, and the sooner, the better. What happens in August of 1944 was then known as the Night of the Gypsies. I showed you earlier in the map that there was a section of Birkenau that was called the Gypsy Camp. Many of the gypsies did work together with the Sonderkommando. They knew exactly what was happening. And when the order came to liquidate the gypsy camp, they all knew that they were going to be marched to the gas chambers, and they wouldn't go. They were screaming and shouting and yelling and pushing and shoving. And at some point, I apologize in advance for saying harsh things, but at some point, the Nazis close off that barrack, make sure that none of the other inmates leave their own barracks, and burn the gypsy camp down. The underground realizes that if this happened in one of the camps, this can happen everywhere. Of course, they know that there is killing in gas, but something in the gypsy night makes things move. This happens in August. The uprising was a joint uprising between the Jewish resistance in Auschwitz and the Polish resistance in Auschwitz. While the Sonderkommando blow up the crematorium, the Polish resistance starts the mutiny within the camp itself. Some of the Nazi guards do get injured, do even die there. The whole mutiny lasts a whole of 12 hours. The Nazis, of course, find this absolutely unacceptable. 2 of their gas chambers are now completely in rubble. And effectively, killing in gas stops in Auschwitz at this point. But I want to tell you one other small, tiny story, and that is of there were a few Sonderkommandos that survived this uprising, and they go into hiding. But where do you hide? Because in Auschwitz, you have every day what they call the appel, where everybody had to leave their barracks and be counted and counted again. Apparently, the Nazis are not very good at math, because every appel lasted for hours because they had to count and count again and then count again. And it's not like they're going according to a list of names, because people in Auschwitz don't have names. They only have numbers. But the numbers are getting all jumbled because, you know, number 1 tattoo was from 1941, and this is already 1944, and there's so many numbers, and now some of the numbers also have letters in front of them. So it's a bit of a mess. So the best place is to hide in plain sight. Find a barrack, join the barrack, just be counted in. And this actually works for a while, and it works for a while for most of the Sonderkommandos. The few that are caught are not even interrogated or trialed the way that Rosa and the 3 other women are. They just get shot. But using those 4 women as an example says something about how the Nazis worked. They were caught, they were interrogated, and they were hung on the 6th of January, 1945. 10 days before the Nazis evacuate the camp. It was still important to make a showcase of what will be done to anybody who tries to go against them. Just going to bring back the slides for a minute. So on the 16th of January, 1945, the Soviets are coming closer and closer to the Auschwitz area. But the war isn't over yet, and the Nazi machine still needs working hands. Whoever was capable, in their opinion, was evacuated out of Auschwitz. That's how the Nazis would like us to call it. We actually call it the death marches, because people were marched for days on ends, weeks on ends, and in one case, even months on end, to other labor camps, to other concentration camps. In Auschwitz itself, there are 7,000 inmates left behind. Some of them are incapable of moving or doing anything. Some of them pretend to be that way so that they don't have to go. And the Nazis leave. And as the Nazis leave, the Soviet army comes in on the 27th of January and liberates Auschwitz. The photo that we have in front of us are 2 women and 3 Soviet soldiers who liberate them. And we can't but go back to the person who oversaw everything that happens in Auschwitz. So we're stepping again outside of our timeline. But Hus, the commandant of Auschwitz, is captured, interrogated, and trialed. He is, of course, found guilty for crimes against humanity and is sentenced to death by hanging. And very appropriately, on the 16th of April, 1947, in the same place where Rosa Roberta a few years earlier was hung, he himself was hung there. Now, before we carry on, I want to pause for a minute and just say that there is much, much more that can be said about Auschwitz and should be said about Auschwitz. There's only so much I could fit into 60 minutes because we're still going to have a Q&A and a few other things. There are a few things that I do want us, though, to discuss before we finish this portion of the evening. And that is, Auschwitz was called by Kazetnik, a survivor author, whose real name was Yechiel Dinor. He coined the term the different planet, Auschwitz. And that is because the rules in Auschwitz and life, if you can call it life in Auschwitz, was different. And there's terminology that came out from Auschwitz that we use sometimes without thinking too much about. Selection becomes a very loaded word because of Auschwitz. We're selected to go to the gas chambers, who to live another day in forced labor. The word sauna that we mentioned before. But there are other words like Musulman. Musulman is basically a walking body, somebody who is no longer really dead, no longer really alive, but not yet really dead. And we have many more. The word capo, for one, that started off as just being a guard, has a completely different meaning to us today. So when we use different kind of terms that come out of Auschwitz. We always need to put it within the connotation of that life, world, or other planet. So that was just a little extra to what I wanted to say. Okay, we shall carry on now. So for every lecture that we have, we usually also have a poem. Cantor Karen Weber could not join us today, but she has sent a recording of her poem for us. The poem is named Hide and Seek.
All still, even the air holds its breath. The open front gate blinks to the striped arm midair. A few guards flee for the forest, but most make the ones who can still walk march out in lines. Burning documents release numbers that shimmy up, disrupting columns of coats, disturbing bounds of teeth where some look for gold, landing in the eyeglasses. Even the air is wounded. I peek from my hiding place in the infirmary, a huge figure covered with snow and fur. A bear? I look closer. It's a man, the first Russian soldier to stumble into camp. The Russians feed us cabbage soup, give us shoes, play the balalaika. Each day, I carry the dead outside to leave in the snow that looks like diamonds. Even the air is exhausted. At 11, I played games with my friend, Anne Frank. One was hide and seek. We both went into hiding with our families. My mother would later find her father, Otto, and marry him.
Okay, so thank you to Karen for that. I would like to introduce Erica. Erica, could you join us? Hi, Erica. So, Erica, I am going to spotlight you. Erica is on our board.
Good evening, everyone. I first want to thank Lynn for another amazing insight into what I think is perhaps a story that we think we know. But Lynn, you always bring something to the table. And for anyone who had a chance to attend Lynn's historical class last year, a taste of what we experienced. So many thanks to Lynn for the work and the effort that she puts into these public lectures. I'm speaking today as a member of the board of Teach the Shoah, just to give everyone an idea of what Teach the Shoah has been doing just this month. We had the second publication of a book by Deborah and Violet, Moment of Witness, which came out on January 7th. We hosted a book talk with them. Then on, yes, it's amazing, Esher Kohak, to Lynn and to Deborah and Violet. We had our Moment of Witness remembrance ceremony on the 23rd of January, commemorating International Holocaust Remembrance Day and honoring the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. We began and launched a very exciting, it's a juggernaut. Lynn, you've done an amazing job. 80 for 80. We have 80 stories in 80 days, all centered on the Auschwitz experience of its victims, its survivors, its heroes. And every day for 3 minutes, you can find this on Instagram, on our website. And that's, Lynn and Deborah and Violet and every storyteller that has joined us in this effort from now until Yom HaShoah. And finally, today we have our historical lecture, which is the Sharing Their Stories, again, centered on Auschwitz. And this is all after a month spent preparing and hosting, if you caught it, our Laissez Faire program, which is our new initiative that we are focused on bringing to life, pairing survivors with young adult tellers. So the reason I wanted to bring this up and speak to you all tonight was all of these things we bring to our audience and to our supporters as part of what we believe is our commitment to bear witness and to continue telling the stories of the Shoah so that they are not voices that are silenced or forgotten. And that's right. We actually have, if you all can see on your screen, I saw her earlier and forgot to mention it. We have Gabriella, who was one of the survivors who actually, if you could spotlight her and just everybody wave. Gabriella Karin was one of the survivors who participated in our laissez-faire program. She was paired with Tori Harrington, and that story we're hoping will be available soon. And it was amazing. Gabriella, it's great to see you again. Thank you so much for joining us. But I wanted to make sure that we all knew about the last thing that we're launching for the next 80 odd days, which is our annual donation appeal, the Lisette Appeal. And the reason that the Lisette Appeal exists is to make sure that we can continue to offer as many of our programming options and as many of the things that you have come to love and want to see more of from Teach the Shoah free. On top of that, we also make sure that we are able to sponsor folks who attend our classes who come to us on a sliding scale of need. And so we have never turned anyone away from our classes. So tonight, if you want to bring up the page just to show everyone, we are opening our annual Lisette Appeal. It will run from today until Yom HaShoah as well. You will receive an email along with everyone else in our community tomorrow. And the Lisette program, the Lisette Appeal is set to for a goal of 15,000 this year. And I want to say three things about that goal. The first is, this is the only time we will ask our community for direct support. We never ask any other time. We're very specific about that because we know that everybody has a lot of asks in their inbox. So this is the one time we will reach out to our community. The second thing is we welcome all support. There is no donation too small. We will absolutely welcome every single dollar that comes in with open arms and an open heart. And on top of that, likes and shares and putting this out to your own communities counts absolutely. And finally, I just wanted to make sure that everyone knows that the donations have an immediate impact. We have come so far. We are beginning to get closer and closer to being self-sufficient in our class programming and the programs we offer to organizations. We are starting to really see progress on the grant front. But when we are able to raise money through the Lisette Appeal, it means that we have greater flexibility with the funding that we have achieved today. We again are the recipients of a $25,000 donation to support our operations. So we're very excited about that. And the Lisette Appeal will go towards some of our operations. It will go towards underwriting the free programming that you see. And it will also go towards continued development of programs like laissez-faire. So I'm here to just say that over the next 80 odd days, you will, probably less than that, we'll be seeing communications in support of the Lisette Appeal. Again, we welcome all support, and we are working on what our donor thank you will be. Last year, our donor thank you event was a chance to meet one of the survivors who participated in the very first laissez-faire pairing. And we're working on what that thank you event will look like this year. So, and I think Deborah says it all in the chat. We are so grateful. There are 24 of you who've chosen to spend an hour plus with us tonight. You have come to our events. You watch us on Facebook. You are with us. And so just that makes it inspirational and exciting to be a part of this effort. So thank you for that. Thank you for everything you do for us across every platform. And now we hope to welcome more of your support going into the next couple of months. Lynn, thank you so much.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you very much. I shall wish you all a good evening or a good night or a good afternoon, wherever you are. And yeah, check out our 8480.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.